I'm kidding. Joining us, Andy McDonald, political commentator, and Jack Rowlett, also a political commentator. Good morning to the two of you.
Good morning.
Looking very smart. You're looking a bit like a 1970s model today.
Why?
It's very swept back.
I know. Well, the hair. I've been growing it out.
You need a cigarette, really.
No, you don't, Doctor. No,
not with the aircon not working.
It's quite warm in here, isn't it?
It is, but it's not as warm as downstairs. The lobby is incredibly warm.
Well, we're cutting back. Right, let's start with that. And obviously I was talking to Vicky Price, their chief economic advisor, about tax. There's no doubt the election has now started, because we've got the front page of the Sunday Telegraph, Sunak saying, I'll cut tax by curbing welfare spending. He said, I want to cut tax. He's now realised they are meant to be a party of low tax. We've got the budget on the 6th of March. We don't really know what the Conservative Party is going to do. Lots of people giving their advice. We've also got the Chancellor at the same time calling, and Vicky picked this up, this word pernicious, which is a very interesting choice of word, I thought. Inheritance tax allegedly doesn't affect that many people, but actually it's the most hated tax when you poll people, which is a slightly interesting juxtaposition. If you were advising the Labour Party, or indeed the Conservative Party, what would you do in terms of tax? Because there is no doubt we're paying far too much tax.
I think, there's a guy in Manchester, Sacha Lord, he's the nighttime economy advisor. He's a lot better than the London nighttime economy advisor, because he tries to actually advocate for the local economy. And he's on a big campaign at the moment to cut VAT in the hospitality sector. And, he's given these countless examples of these really big brands in Manchester that have had to close because of the rising costs in staff, energy, tax. I think that we do need to cut VAT on hospitality completely to save local economies and just ensure that we have a better standard of life.
And that would be your number one tax cut, would it? Jack, what would yours be?
I think what would be a really good idea is extending the full expensing policy that we saw in the autumn statement even further, because currently it only applies to offsetting capital investment from plant and machinery costs, but we could expand it to other kinds of capital investment, because that's the sort of thing that's really going to boost the supply side.
So the full expensing, which was made permanent, is 25p for every pound. It was the largest business tax cut in British history, allegedly, costing £10 billion a year. So you're saying that basically allowing businesses to grow, offsetting that against tax, means that they can employ more people?
Absolutely. And we know that existing policy only applies to certain kinds of capital investment, so we could expand it further and really boost that supply side of the British economy and consequently growth even more. I think that has to be the priority.
So is that a vote winner enough?
I think it is. I think ultimately growth is a vote winner. Growing the economy.
Sure, but if I knock on a door and I say to Mrs. Miggins, we're going to extend full expensing, I don't think I'd get her vote.
Well, I think it's about how you make the case, isn't it? Because actually, if we look at the inheritance tax, people hate it, but it's a tax that most people don't pay. So there's a really valid argument against it. So I think so long as you can make the case effectively politically, actually growth is a really powerful argument.
Agreed. Let me ask you the question I asked yesterday, which was about vision and drive. Keir Starmer is very dull. Rishi Sunak is very dull. There is no drive, but maybe partly we want someone dull. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. Since 2016, it's been a very, very exciting couple of years in British politics. Ever since even leading up to the referendum, it's been very hit and go. The democracy almost broke in 2018, 2019 when it was Theresa May's Brexit negotiations and failed deal attempts to get through Parliament. I think we do need someone a bit dull, and Rishi Sunak was quoted on Kunzberg this morning. Someone's leaked that there's no big plans, no big ideas this year, because that was all for last year. So I think this new spin line, this new spin line that Keir Starmer's really boring, but now he's leaking. Oh yeah, that was all last year. All the big ideas. It's going to be a boring year. It's crazy.
I just wonder though, can't we have somebody who's really competent but also quite exciting?
Well, that's my point. I haven't got his exact words in front of me, but Keir Starmer talked about, growing Britain, national renewal, shining light on the flickering, whatever, something nonsense. It was nonsense.
Yeah, I'm sure it was a beautifully written speech, but probably, he's a boring guy. He's just letting it take its course. He's letting the Tories hang themselves, unfortunately, because why would you do anything else in his position?
Agreed with you. However, I don't think the lead is as hard as they think it is. And I think there are a lot of people dancing around. We see that in the messages coming in. They're looking to see what is the vision from these different parties. Whether it's those two or indeed other parties, we have a problem because we have a particular political system in this country. It'd be very interesting. What is your price if the Conservative, that's the question I'm asking people, what price would be yours so that you are then given this tax cut and you go, yeah, I'm going to vote for you?
I don't think there's any tax cut that the Conservatives could push through that would make me vote for them at this point. I think they've been so incompetent over the past few years that they frankly don't deserve to be re-elected. And I think the most important issue at the next election is planning reform. That comes above everything else. We can't build anything at the moment. It's pressing down on growth. It's diminishing the prospects of working people, and I think right now Labour's policy is imperfect, and I would much rather be able to vote for a centre-right party, but frankly Labour's policy on planning is better, and as long as that is the case, they will have my votes. If Rishi Sunak became a builder and not a blocker, then I would be prepared to vote for him.
Would that sway your vote, Doctor?
It certainly wouldn't sway me to Keir Starmer, that's for sure, but it would sway me to somebody else. I've decided now that it's time to come out of this two-party system and vote with my heart and manifesto. OK,
so that's a really interesting point. So is it now time to say, actually, our democratic process doesn't work, we need proportional representation? Because the current both parties are saying, don't vote for that one because you'll get this one. So don't vote for a smaller party like, for example, Reform UK, because you're going to get a Labour administration. Now, that to me is a terrible indictment of our political system.
I think, in fairness, Keir Starmer's never spoken against voting. People voting for Reform UK. Just for clarification.
He wouldn't.
I think the discourse has
We had Lee Anderson, for example, saying
I think it was really interesting seeing the discourse over, I think it's been about a couple of weeks now, where Lee Anderson said something on some TV channel saying, "Oh well, don't vote for Reform."
I think Rishi has actually said in the Telegraph today.
Yeah, he wrote a piece. A vote for Reform is a vote for Labour.
Indeed.
And I think probably in a fair amount of seats it is. I think if you look in your southeast seats, vote for Lib Dems.
I have a solution
Tories,
to this.
But what was your solution?
The Tories could stand down in favour of reform.
Why would the Tories stand down in favour of reform?
Well, it would give us a different party.
Yeah, but that's not in the interest of the Conservative Party even remotely.
They're going to be destroyed.
I mean, I'll criticise Reform UK and the former Brexit Party as much as I'm not a fan, but I think what they did in 2019 was very quite sacrificial of them, and you don't see it very often in politics. They did step down because they thought it was for the greater good.
Time for the favour to be returned.
But the Conservatives won't do that.
I'm staying very quiet on that particular issue, as you can imagine. Let me just move on to this. Chris Skidmore has now stood down, the former Energy Minister, as we know. Jeremy Hunt has now said he profoundly disagrees with the former Conservative Minister. He quit over the government's energy plans. Now, he obviously was responsible for signing a net zero into law, the fact we have to get to net zero by 2050, and he's very unhappy with direction of policy. Now, Dr. Rennie and I were talking about this morning. This seat, it ceases to exist in a few months' time. Why? He's obviously doing this to make a statement, to make a protest against the government. It's going to cost us 250 grand to hold this election. Should political parties actually stand in this election, or should we boycott it?
Well, I mean, you can't boycott it. There does need to be an MP for that seat. If Chris Skidmore is choosing to go, then there has to be a replacement. I do think it's rather ridiculous that he's chosen to stand down at this time, given the close proximity we are to the general election. And as I understand it, he's resigning to take up a job as well. And I suspect that's the real reason why he's going, rather than any sort of principled stand. But yeah, I mean, it's ludicrous that he's resigning.
You're right. Election. Of course, he has some vested interest there as well. But just in terms of the net zero, surely this is a great policy. Look, even if we agree that we need to get to net zero, that using our own energy in this country by having new oil and gas licences in this country actually saves our carbon footprint, because it's much cheaper and easier to get our own than bringing it in by LPG from other countries.
Sure. Yeah. I think that the most weird thing about this all, Jeremy Hunt's come out now and said, "Oh no, it was all rubbish what he was talking." Why did he keep taking advice from him for the last 5 years? If it was such rubbish, why has he kept him kept him in the circles as the independent chair of the was it the Energy Commission or something?
So
why is he keeping him in the circles?
The question I have for you is this now the dividing line between the Conservative Party and Labour, because Labour is now rowing back on the 28 billion.
Well, they're not. That's not true.
They are.
They're not.
They are.
No, that was spin. He said it was a confident ambition. That's basically a pledge.
What does that mean?
A confident ambition. It's the same as Reform UK saying we're going to stop the boats. It's a confident ambition. It's essentially an election pledge.
It's policy.
It's an election pledge. A confident ambition. The question was phrased to him. The question was phrased to him on LBC. The question was phrased to him on LBC as, "Are you 100% sure this was going to happen?" A confident ambition. That's a pledge.
Unless I'm living in a parallel universe.
That's a pledge. It's a pledge.
Okay, let's ask him. Is an electoral pledge the same as a confident ambition?
No.
It is. He's not rolling back on it. He's not rolling back on it.
It isn't at all. And I think he said it's a confident ambition that they're going to be able to meet this funding by 2027, I think was his exact words. It's not the same as a pledge. They have wrote back on it. I think it's rather embarrassing for the Labour Party, but it is an indication as well that they're perhaps slightly concerned that the current state of the polls isn't a reflection of the country, because they do seem to be taking their sort of position on fiscal credibility much more seriously and wanting to appear perhaps a little bit more boring on those issues to not scare voters off.
Yeah, and that is the key point, because my fear is that this confident ambition is really the ambition, but because they're seeing the writing on the wall and that people really have a problem with some of these net zero targets, they're going to pretend that actually they may not do it, get into power, and then our lives are going to be wrecked again by it.
Just before we go to a break, I just want to ask you about something completely different, about Harry Pittman. This 16-year-old boy has been remanded into custody, charged with the murder of Harry Pittman. This is in North London on New Year's Eve. I mean, this is just an awful story. He went there to watch the fireworks. He went with friends and very sadly died. As young people yourselves, what on earth is going wrong in this country?
Well, it's appalling. It's such a tragic case. I think it's an example of... Well, it's the result of lots of things. It's a result of cuts to police. You know, there's a much lesser presence of police on the streets now. I think it's evidence of a lack of support for troubled young people. You know, we don't have as many youth clubs. We don't have as much support in schools anymore because of cuts to funding. And ultimately, the fabric of society frays at that point, and we see more and more instances of these sorts of tragic cases occurring when you don't have a support system to catch people before they commit these terrible offences, before they go down that route of crime.
Or are we not tough enough when we do catch these boys and they're carrying machetes and knives? Are we not tough enough on the punishment they get at that point so they don't go out next week with another one and kill someone?
Well, you have to catch them first.
But
if you don't have enough police on the streets, then
certainly when I was growing up, it seems a rite of passage to carry a machete now. I mean, that would never have well, as far as I'm aware, it would be incredibly rare to happen 3,000 years ago when I grew up. Andy, what is going on?
I think just in fairness, you know, I grew up in the East Midlands near Nottingham, and Nottingham was nicknamed Shottingham throughout the 60s, 70s and 80s. So yeah. I think, you know, there have always been these presences. In London, it was the Krays and the gangs of South London. So there has always been a presence of violence within young people.
But not like this.
I know. Going to Primrose Hill, it's
Primrose Hill is a very affluent part of London. You have a view over London. That's why people went there. He went there for a night out to watch the fireworks, and he never came home.
Well, I think it's a combined failure between Tory Britain and Khan's London. Honestly, I think it's a combined failure. They failed young people.
I think there's a really interesting point here, which was I was reading this morning about the number of police stations that have closed down, and you cannot find a police station now. Certainly in East London, I can't find.
You can't in North London either. In fact, quite close to Primrose Hill, Hampstead, Belsize Park, those police stations went quite some time ago. They're luxury flats now.
And so why is that? Why have we actually decided that we no longer need that visible police presence? Because I agree, when you have 15 minutes of police presence, you reduce violent crime by 70%.
It's cuts. That is cuts.
Yeah, it is cuts. Absolutely. I mean, this is what happens when you cut police numbers. There isn't a magic solution where you can cut funding to the police, cut the number of police officers, and still have the same level of ability to tackle crime. You know, if you're, you know, going out with a machete and you want to commit a crime, you're going to be much less emboldened to do that if you see a visible police presence in places like Primrose Hill.
So that was a good admission from you that you think it's a failure of the Conservative government, also the London Mayor. The London Mayor is a Labour Mayor. Yeah. How much of a problem is Sadiq Khan for Keir Starmer?
I don't think he's a problem per se. You know, I think they have certain disagreements on policies that have been aired over the last few years. You know, a couple of months ago there was an issue on ULEZ, but I think Sadiq Khan doesn't disagree that there is a problem with knife crime. I don't think Keir Starmer disagrees that there's a problem with knife crime.
But London streets have never been so unsafe.
He blamed it on mobile phones. I mean, that's how seriously he's taken this issue. He blamed the problem on mobile phone manufacturers for making their phones too enticing.
Yeah. Well, I think many in the Labour Party are hoping that this London mayoral election's coming up in May 2nd. You know, it's not that far away, 4 months. You know, the risk of you know, Jeremy Corbyn and Susan Hall and a few other candidates coming in. You know, it's not going to be as safe for Labour as it once was. So hopefully, a lot of people are hoping that it'll squeeze him, get him into line, and really get in touch with people in London.
Are they secretly hoping he gets deposed?
I don't know. I don't know. It will never look good for Keir Starmer if we lose London the year of a election year. You know, that's never good.
Do you think Jeremy Corbyn's going to stand?
I don't know. Probably. I can't see why he wouldn't.
If he stands,
it makes political sense for him. It makes political sense for him to stand because he'll lose a lot of grassroots support amongst the Labour membership. There's a lot of them in the North London kind of CLPs.
Well, let me just bring Jack in because I have to go to a break. Just in terms of the London mayoral election, I'm very aware that not everyone lives in London, but it is an important election. Just in terms of that, what's your sense about Sadiq Khan, how popular or unpopular he is in London, and whether you think there will actually be a change? Because he relies on certain groups to vote for him to get him across that threshold.
Well, I think when you talk to people in London, he does seem to be pretty unpopular. I think at best people are pretty apathetic about his performance, but they're certainly not satisfied about crime, about ULEZ, about housing. And I think the really significant thing is because the supplementary vote system's been abolished, actually I think this is going to be much, much closer than last time, and potentially we will see a change because he is just so unpopular.
Really fascinating stuff. Thank you for the moment. We have to go to a break. I just want to make it absolutely clear we don't condone the carrying of any offensive weapon, and the scenes obviously in London are absolutely shocking and mirrored around the country as well. Stay with us after the break. These two will be back. Oh, and the doctor and the wife. She'll be here as well. This is TalkTV. This is interesting. Peter in Suffolk. Hi, David and Rennie. I think the way youth are today goes back to the day corporal punishment ended in schools. I had corporal punishment at school.
I didn't.
Didn't you?
No.
Should we... And I've now gone on a tangent. Should we bring back... I am ancient, I'm just being told in my ear. Should we bring back corporal punishment? Would that solve it?
No.
Why?
Because I don't think hitting children is
you got smacked.
Really gonna bring them into line. I think what we need is more police and more enforcement of the law.
And maybe better parenting, maybe.
Perhaps in some cases, and perhaps more support of parents to do a better job as well.
It'd be very interesting to do a poll on corporal punishment and see what actually comes back. I imagine.
I think there'll be an age divide.
I think there will.
It happens every silly season when all the journalists are bored in the summer. There's always these silly kind of polls, and like it's always like 50-50, and it's just like what? It's just such a silly idea.
Right.
What?
So let's move on.
I've got one. Do you want one?
Yes.
Do you want this penny from Essex?
Yes.
Renee is spot on. Get rid of the Tories and put Reform UK in their place. Winners.
Andy McDonald.
I've got no control over what Reform UK do or what the Conservative Party do, unfortunately.
So I read this story this morning. This is something completely different. Obviously, we are struggling with the NHS. We have a junior doctor strike. The whole system is decimated. People cannot get care. People are dying. I'm absolutely livid about it. They're holding out for 35%. The junior doctors in Scotland have settled for 12.5%. The nurses got 5%. The consultants are currently consulting over the deal that's been given to them. Meanwhile, the NHS is asking patients to choose from 159 religions, 12 genders, 10 sexual preferences before you can even go to a hospital appointment. Now, apparently, the health service is asking people, are you a goddess, a satanist or a druid before you actually access care? Now, this has been described as wokery to the nth degree, and these are complex and intrusive questions and are leaving people baffled. I'm not surprised, and raising concerns about personal security. Apparently, I'm so confused about this. Gender identity, and they say, right, now you can choose from gender fluid, questioning, agender, non-binary, a demi-boy, whatever that is, a demi-girl, male, and what are we doing?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like rather a large list of options. I mean, I must confess I'm not entirely sure what a druid is. But I guess we get asked intrusive and complex questions when we seek medical care all the time, and I suppose it's yeah, of course we do.
There are only two things as a doctor you need to know about your patient. You need to know what their biological sex is, because men and women respond differently to treatments and have different diseases, and you need to know their age, because again, children are treated differently and drugs matter when you're dealing with it. The rest of this is nonsense, and we need to get rid of all the forms and the form filling and the people and the costs behind this.
I was about to say this costs a lot of money to do stuff like this, and also aren't we alienating particular? I mean, it alienates people of my age, let alone older people, who I mean, there's a great quote from someone saying, I'm having a heart stent. What difference does it make if I'm straight, pansexual or a demi-boy?
Yeah, I mean...
Or a Catholic or a Protestant.
Yeah, this is true. Just as a point of clarification, I believe a druid is an ancient medicinal wizard.
It is.
I believe.
What's a demi-boy?
A demi-boy.
What is a demi-boy?
A demi-boy.
Does anyone know what?
That's an excellent question, Phil. I don't know.
He's ignoring us at the moment.
Oh, God.
I mean,
but anyway, back to your question.
Well, I mean, so this just got me thinking: has this gender ideology now gone far too far? Because it's now permeated almost every aspect of our public services, and we are not concentrating on frontline services. We're far too busy painting rainbows on the car parks and asking stupid questions instead of actually dealing with care and keeping people alive.
Yeah, this is just a bit weird. I'm sure whichever University Hospitals Trust has come up with this has partnered with some new data consultancy that runs their open surveys a bit differently, and it's just a bit of a waste of money.
But
it's odd.
On a serious note, a bit of a waste of money is a bit glib, actually, because when we talk about police officers being cut, but they can paint rainbow cars and things like that. If we took all of this money in every institution and ploughed it just into the services that those people are supposed to give, doctors, nurses, police, then we might have more.
I mean,
police
how much did this survey cost?
Well, it's not. Sorry, Jack.
It's not a survey.
This service is being provided by an American company, I believe, and
it's been incorporated into NHS Trust. They basically
but it's their preliminary, questioning. We would be doing that anyway, and it's from the article. It sounds like this company
but where
have
are the
instituted
grown-ups?
this.
Where are the grown-ups that say this is nonsense? Stop.
Don't spend a penny.
But if we're spending money on this service anyway for other reasons, there's not that big an opportunity cost
you're making it more and more complex.
Doing this.
But also we need to, in my humble opinion, we need to get rid of all of these diversity managers, get rid of all of these layers of bureaucracy. And this is the point. I keep being told the NHS doesn't have enough money. It does. We have 11.7% of GDP is spent on the NHS. It's just going out the sides to ridiculous non-clinical jobs. And I would much rather see doctors and nurses paid better and more doctors and nurses. Anyway, let's move on and talk about something else. Have we become too American generally as a country? And the reason I ask this is it is spurred off Rod Stewart, who gave a whopping great tip at Glen Eagles. I don't know if you saw this. He gave 10 grand to the staff. He went there for Hogmanay. Well done him. I mean, he's got the money, he can do that. And it got me thinking, there's a really great article as well in the Times this morning about what we expect to pay on a tip in a restaurant. So, in terms of service charges, 60 years ago, you didn't have a service charge on your bill. 10 years ago, it was 10%. It's now gone up. It's now standardly 12.5%. In some restaurants in London, it's now 15%. And so, for example, at the Delaunay French Brasserie Zadel, and then they added 12.5% in Yorkshire, and there was an absolute archie-barchie over it. And often that service charge is hidden, and then you're expected to tip on top. Have we become too American, and are we right to add in that kind of level of service charge?
Well, I think we have become too American on this issue, certainly. I mean, I think a service charge or a tip should be reserved for good service,
yeah.
You know, someone who goes above and beyond. I mean, I was in a cafe recently and I used a self-service machine and that asked me if I wanted to tip. I mean, it's completely absurd.
Who are you tipping, yourself?
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Isn't this the very point, though? Are tips not now actually funding low pay in restaurants? And that's why you have to in America.
And it is illegal, I believe, because they've actually passed laws to say that you can't use that to prop up the wages of your staff. But it is interesting because when I lived in the States, 20% across the board for everything. And there's that great expression, it's a lot of money. When America sneezes, we catch a cold.
Well, that's because in America, you know, servers are on like $2, $3
They
out,
are.
and they do rely on tips, and they have tip shares with the back of house, and there is a wider process in America. But here,
How much do you tip?
Normally between 10 to 15%, generally. Depending on how good the service is. But I think if you're dining somewhere that's got a 12.5% tip, you know, what was it, that French brasserie that you quoted?
I think
you can probably afford an extra 10%.
But isn't
It's very judgmental. Some people might save up to go out.
Yeah, it might be their one day.
I'm sure.
But you're right, aren't you? The fact is that I think you should reward great service and not expect it. And in fact, I've been in restaurants where if you don't tip appropriately, you're sort of frowned at. But there's another point here, which is about the amount we pay waiters. In London, the average waiter earns 28,000. In New York, where they rely on salaries, on tips, sorry, it's over $50,000 US. So the question is whether we should remain resolute and make sure we pay people properly and then tip appropriately.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there is a serious issue as well, which is that if we got rid of the tipping or the service charge, then restaurants would have to pay the VAT and national insurance on those increased prices. And I think that's what we're seeing here. Restaurants don't want to pay that tax, and really it's on the government to reform that. Otherwise, you're not going to see change, and we are going to become more American in this.
Finally, before I say goodbye to you, which is your favourite movie? Golden Globes today. Where's your money? Oppenheimer, Barbie. Are you a Barbie man?
No, I'm not, alas. Oppenheimer, very much more my wheelhouse, and I think that would be my pick for sure.
I did watch Maestro over Christmas, and it was absolutely superb.
Oh, that's had 4 nominations.
I'd say Barbie's the one for me. I think it was. I really enjoyed it. It was an excellent film.
It
was an excellent film. You know, Margot Robbie was phenomenal in it. I think. You know, they've got like 8 or 9 nominations. So clearly somebody thinks.
Barbie has 9 nominations. Oppenheimer has 8. I loved Oppenheimer. Hated
Fantastic
Barbie.
film.
Absolutely hated, detested. Dreadful, dreadful film. Thank you, chaps, for coming in. That was today's.